Somewhere tonight, in a quiet home, in a dimly lit room, there sits a chair. It's an ordinary chair, but what if I told you the chair once held a person, and now the person is gone? Not vanished, not abducted, not murdered. Burned, reduced to ash from the inside out. No raging fire, no spreading flames, no damage to the room, except for one horrifying detail: the human body nearly incinerated, while everything around it remains eerily untouched. Good evening. Somewhere between midnight and the unknown, you're riding the frequency where reality begins to flicker. I'm Carl Richardson, and this is Midnight Frequency Radio. Tonight, we dive into one of the most disturbing and controversial phenomenon ever whispered about in the shadows of science: spontaneous human combustion. Is it real? Is it misunderstood science? A slow burn explained away by chemistry? Or is it something else entirely? Something internal? Something biological? Or perhaps something not of this world? For decades, reports have surfaced. Bodies burned to near total ash, limbs missing, skulls shrunken, rooms untouched except for a greasy residue left behind like a calling card. And yet, science struggles to explain it fully. Tonight we speak with a man who has spent years examining these cases, walking the line between skepticism and belief. Author, researcher, investigator, Larry Arnold. Larry was trained in the methodology of science with an undergraduate major in mechanical engineering. He later worked for the private sector in electrical engineering. Larry developed a burgeoning fascination with human consciousness, potential, and undertook a new province and study, the unexplained. In 1976, he founded Parascience International. As director of PSI, he combines his scientific background with investigating and describing the intriguing world of Forteana, those unconventional subjects and weird events that fail to find acceptance, let alone explanation, within the boundaries of today's science. Larry is internationally recognized for his pioneering research in spontaneous human combustion. His book, Ablaze, dares to ask the question most are afraid to even consider: what if the fire starts within? Stay with us, because tonight we're not just asking how this happens, we're asking why. We'll be right back with Larry after this.
This is Dark Matter News. I'm Joshua Stark. Astronomers have created the most detailed 3D map of the universe ever built, and it could change our understanding of how the cosmos works. This breakthrough comes from a powerful instrument known as the Dark Energy Spectroscopic Instrument, or DESI, which has spent 5 years scanning the sky from a mountaintop observatory in Arizona. Its mission: to better understand dark energy, the mysterious force driving the universe's accelerating expansion. The result is staggering. The map includes roughly 47 million galaxies and quasars, far surpassing original expectations, and stretches across more than 11 billion years of cosmic history. Each point represents a galaxy, helping scientists trace how matter has spread and evolved over time. What makes this especially important is that the data starting to reveal about dark energy itself. Early findings suggest it may not be constant as previously believed. Instead, it could be changing over time, potentially weakening. If confirmed, that would challenge the current standard model of cosmology, which assumes dark energy is a fixed property of space. Scientists say this could mark a major paradigm shift in our understanding of the universe. Beyond that, the map provides an unprecedented tool for studying how galaxies form, how cosmic structures grow, and how the universe has expanded over billions of years. Catch up with us at darkmatternews.com.
You know that it would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar if I was to say.
Larry Arnold, welcome to Midnight Frequency Radio.
Good evening, Carl. It is a delight and a pleasure to be with you, particularly as a familiar member of Art Bell, who had great influence on us. We were blessed to do a couple shows with Art back on Dreamland, and it was always a joy when we were delivering newspapers early in the morning to be able to listen to his many topics and guests and his fascinating persona.
Well, he had a knack for it, and of course I'm not as good at it as he was, but I'm doing my best, and I hope I get the job done this evening. My questions are probably routine. You've probably been asked who knows how many times before, but what first drew you to investigate spontaneous human combustion?
When we were in junior high school, I had a book program. You could spend 35 or 50 cents on paperback books, and we bought one called Stranger Than Science by Frank Edwards. And in fact, we still have the book, Frank Edwards. In his book, as a newspaperman, he had a chapter called Incredible Cremations, and it dealt specifically with the fire fatality of a woman named Mary Hardy Reeser that happened in St. Petersburg, Florida in 1951. It intrigued us, but Frank Edwards was a newspaperman, and sometimes he was noted for writing fiction as well as fact. When we left college, and we never forgot about reading about Mary Reeser's apparently spontaneous human combustion event. And we decided we would go down to the Library of Congress, rummage through their microfilm of newspapers from St. Petersburg in 1951 to see whether or not Frank Edwards had accurately reported this apparently strange, alleged spontaneous human combustion event that befell Mary Reeser, whether he had made up the story. And what we discovered was that this was front page news in July of 1951 in the St. Petersburg and Tampa newspapers. This was a mystery that consumed Mary Reeser, as you said in your introduction, almost to dust, almost to powder, and left the investigators in 1951, at least for 1 month time, utterly baffled and bumfuddled. Details of Mary Reeser's death are basically this. Pennsylvania native, she grew up not too far from where we live, outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And in fact, she's buried about 12 miles from where we live and from where we're talking to you right now, Carl, over in Mechanicsburg. What is buried there is a few pounds of ashen vertebrae, 1 foot, a few pieces of calcined vertebrae, and what was said to be a liver, as well as a head that had shrunk to the size various described as that of an orange or a teacup. Quite astonishing. This is an incredibly localized blaze that should have required temperatures probably exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And yet the only thing in Mary Reeser's apartment in St. Pete that burned that morning on July 2, 1951 was herself, her chair, and an end table sitting next to the chair. On the morning or the evening of July 1st, 1951, she was a widow, 67 years of age, and a known smoker. She weighed about 175 pounds. The following morning, when a Western Union messenger arrived around 8 o'clock to deliver a telegram, the landlady, Pansy Carpenter, for Mrs. Reeser, took the telegram in hand and went to open Mary's apartment door and screamed because the handle of the door was hot to the touch. Some painters working across the street ran over and broke down the door and found a scene macabre beyond belief, as it would later be described by a forensic anthropologist, Dr. Krogman. The fire consumed Mary, the chair, and the end table, leaving behind about 8 pounds of ashen residue. And yet, in the rest of the apartment, there is very little heat or flame damage present. The damage was so severe to her 167, 175 pound body that 2 firemen had to literally scoop her up with shovels.
Oh, my goodness.
No odor of burned flesh, the acrid smell that's normally associated with a human fire fatality, that was missing. Speculation began to span the gamut, basically looking for explanations. Certainly, arson was considered an arson murder, but no accelerant was found at the scene. She was a smoker, yes, but according to the fire officials who had dealt with fire fatalities before Mary Reeser's, they had never found a body burned so badly as was she. Normally at a fatal fire scene, and unfortunately thousands of people die every year in America from fire mishaps, usually caused by a dropped cigarette or pipe. But in this case, or in those cases, you can pick up the body, take it to a morgue, you can autopsy it, you can look for evidence of foul play, you can look for evidence of arson murder, because you have a large portion of the body still intact. In fact, Professor Elaine Pope, the Dame of Flame, has done experiments on burned cadavers, and she insists that even in the worst burned body, you can find evidence of a gunshot or a stab wound, something that would indicate foul play. We would challenge her or any forensic anthropologist to find in the ashes that Mary Reeser left behind evidence of foul play. For 1 month, this was a blazing, macabre mystery. In fact, at the time, in nearby Bradenburg, Florida, a world-renowned forensic anthropologist, Dr. Walter Marion Krogman, was vacationing. He heard about the strange fiery fate that befell Mrs. Reeser, took a professional interest in it, and was just bumfuddled by what he learned as he pursued his investigation. There was the localized nature of the fire. In fact, it was he said Mary Reeser died in a circle of fire that was about 3 feet in diameter that encompassed the chair and her body. But beyond that radius, she must have extended her left leg because, as we said, the left foot and its black leather slipper remained intact and untouched. We're not clearly about at the ankle. Within that 3-foot radius, however, Mary Reeser had burned so completely that she exceeded what happens normally in a crematorium retort. And as background, so your listeners, if they're not familiar with what happens to a burned body, this is a good time to describe the cremation process itself. Crematorium retort operates at temperatures 22 to 2400 degrees Fahrenheit for 60 to 90 minutes. The temperature is then lowered to 1700 to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit to another hour to an hour and a half. What comes out of the crematorium retort is not powder, but bone fragments. Those fragments are then put in a device called a cremulator, which physically grinds the bone fragments to powder to be placed in an urn and handed over to the next of kin. Crematorium retorts are not cheap. And until about 10 years ago, it took more than an hour to cremate a body, usually an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. Only a few years ago did cremation technology arrive at the ability to cremate an adult human in 1 hour's time. But to do that, it requires millions of gallons of natural gas or 40 to 50 gallons of fuel oil. It requires a retort, which can cost $100,000. It requires filtration equipment, licensing, zoning regulations have to be met, plus the cremulator to grind up the bone fragments to literally powdery dust. Cremation takes time, takes resources, and takes a lot of effort to incinerate a body. And what comes out of a crematorium retort does not rival what Mrs. Reeser was able to do by herself, clearly not in a retort, not in a crematorium, but in an apartment in St. Petersburg, Florida in the morning of July 2, 1951. Dr. Krogman, as we mentioned earlier, was mystified by the localization of the fire. He was mystified by what appeared to have been an incredibly intense fire that would have exceeded what happens in a crematorium, but clearly there was no additional fire, flame, or heat damage beyond that 3-foot circle that consumed Mrs. Reeser, her chair, and the end table. He was certainly mystified by the alleged shrinking of Mrs. Reeser's head. That's atypical. And yet he was also perplexed because he knew from his studies in forensic anthropology that there had been a history of cases that sounded very much like what happened to Mrs. Reeser. But Krogman had no explanation for that, how this could occur. He said it caused the hairs on his neck to rise, and if he were living in the Middle Ages, he would speak of something like black magic. He called the Mary Reeser scene macabre beyond belief. And there the mystery laid for a month, and suddenly, after some 30 days, all of a sudden it was determined that Mrs. Reeser was, believe it or not, the victim of a chair smoking accident. She had dropped one of her cigarettes in her lap and slowly or rapidly, depending on who was speaking, immolated herself to that few pounds of dry ashen powder, and the left foot still intact. We were at Mary Reeser's apartment. We've been in communication with the St. Pete Police Department for decades. In 1990, they had still not closed the case. They had kept the case open. In fact, the case was closed only a few years ago by the St. Petersburg Police Department. As to Mary having been the victim of a smoking mishap, this raises the issue of all of the cases that include Mary Reeser, Dr. Bentley, George Mott, a retired fireman up in upstate New York in 1986, and others that we can discuss with you, Carl, in some detail. All these cases are explained away by the mainstream scientific experts.
Of course it is.
In air quotes. As a result of the wick effect. These people drop cigarettes on themselves or a pipe ash, perhaps, and over several hours, they will slowly immolate in their own body fat, leaving behind, as we've said already, something that is more thoroughly incinerated than can be done in a crematorium retort scientifically and technologically. We find that very problematic, in part because we've tried the experimentation ourselves. We've taken ham shake with bone intact in the meat sample, soaked it in a marinade of brandy, whiskey, and vodka for a year, and then wrapped it in cotton fabric and torched it. Did it burn itself to powder? No. We did this experiment for the BBC in 1999, and after an hour, the flame went out, and we still had 98 to 99% of the meat sample intact, unburned. So how could a human body whose consistency is about 70 to 75% water, in fact, one naysayer, Dr. Murray, says that spontaneous human combustion would be like trying to light a swimming pool. There's just too much water, can't be done. I have to apply that also to those who invoke the wick theory. It just doesn't make any sense to us. And our own experiments that we've done multiple times has also proven that the wick effect, the wick theory, just does not work to explain these cases that history has called spontaneous human combustion, perhaps a bad terminology. We prefer to rename the classic cases like Mary Reeser, SHC, as a sudden human cremation, because that's exactly what it is. These cases happen quickly. It involves a human being, and it rivals and indeed exceeds what can be done technologically in a crematorium.
Do you think a flame is involved? I mean, I find it extremely interesting that a person can burn like that and it not cause the rest of the building to catch fire. Do you have any thoughts on how that can take place?
We find that very interesting too, which is why we've devoted 2/3 of our life, now 50 years, to tracking down these cases that defy common sense, defy medical understanding. If SHC is the alleged controversial and hotly debated enigma that defies common sense, it is an utter affront to orthodoxy. If it is real, it's a nightmare for debunkers and a great 21st century medical mystery. And if it's not, then we are indeed what some have called a world-class fool for having wasted 2/3 of our life in something that is nothing more than an urban myth that can be easily explained away by the wick effect. We actually wonder, based on the 500 some cases that we've been able to document historically, archivally, and in many cases by first-person interviews with the first responders at these remarkable fire scenes. We often wonder, as have a few of them, whether this is actually a fire in the conventional sense, i.e. an oxidizing-based flame. In our book Ablaze, we consider many theories that avoid having to deal with the oxidizing flame type explanation for these remarkable human incinerations. We can get into that later, but if this is a normal fire, and if this is a normal fire that struck down Mary Reeser and other cases that we personally investigated, then there's something afoot that we can't understand. And frankly, forensic anthropologists and professional fire investigators themselves can't understand. When we present the photographs and the documentation to professional firefighters, we get basically two different reactions, both of which we find most curious. One is, I've never seen anything like this in my career as a firefighter. I didn't know these fires could happen. This is really intriguing, quite mysterious, and I'd like you to tell me more, Larry, about what you know about these fire scenes. That's one reaction that we get. In fact, when we were down at the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland, wrapping up research for our book before it was published, we had the opportunity to meet with three senior instructors that day. One expressed passing interest but didn't want to know any details. The second we encountered in the hallway, and when we tried to hand him a photograph of Mrs. Reeser and Dr. Bentley that we could discuss soon with you, Carl, he turned on his heels and ran away from us. He said, frankly, I don't want to know anything about this. The third instructor happened to see that encounter. He came over, looked at the photographs, and he said, I've heard about this. I can't explain this. Come into my office, sit down, and tell me everything you know. We'd like to get that response from more fire officials. When we were out in California last year to do a shoot with William Shatner for his program on the History Channel titled The Unexplained, we met with a fire chief in Pasadena, California, who had worked a couple months earlier on the Altadena fires. Introduced ourselves, explained why we were there. When we travel around, we always try to meet with local fire companies because we never know where we're going to find a credible lead. In this case, we didn't find a lead, but we found a fire professional who was just bumfuddled by the photographs that we were showing to him as we described the circumstances related to these photographs. He had dealt with several fire fatalities in his career, and he told us, I had never, ever encountered a fire fatality that looks like the photographs you're showing to me. He was intrigued. He was interested. There's something perhaps even rarer than spontaneous human combustion. That's what's happening tonight. As we're chatting with you about this subject, the History Channel is running that very episode of The Unexplained, their episode titled Mysterious Urban Legends. It's airing right now as we speak, and it's going to re-air at a couple hours, 2 a.m. Sunday morning on April 19th. For people who get the show and want to tune it in, it is on the rerun cycle, blessedly. The show presents SHC as an urban legend, but at the end of the program actually concludes that this probably isn't an urban legend, that there really is historical, scientific, substantive proof and evidence that supports that on rare occasion, the human body will take fire by means presently unknown and will immolate more completely than happens in a crematorium. And that is the mystery. That is the enigma. That is the confounding confabulation of these combustible conundrums.
Why do you think that mainstream science doesn't want to really deal with this? I mean, to me, that would be something, if I worked in that field, it was something I'd want to learn about and learn a way to accept it and understand it.
That's a wonderful question, and believe us, we have pondered that ourselves for many a year. If we were in the fire service and we came across a case like Mary Reeser or Dr. Bentley, we would be spending the rest of our night plowing through websites, looking through technical journals, talking to fire educators, trying to understand how these people can immolate so completely in a fire that is an affront to what is supposed to happen in a human fatal fire scene. The best answer we have for that is twofold. One, fire professionals tend to think, at least it's been our experience, that they believe they pretty much understand fire processes, and cases that fit the concept historically of spontaneous human combustion belie just about every one of those precepts that they've been taught to believe they understand. and act upon. Secondly, it seems to be a case simply of pure outright xenophobia, fear of the unknown, fear of the unexplained. With our scientific background in engineering, when we're presented with a mystery or a puzzle that needs to be solved, we try to delve in, dig deep, and figure it out. We've discovered, however, that not everybody responds that way. And Carl, you've probably discovered this too in your career with dealing with various Fortean topics. Some people don't want to know too much about something that is disconcerting and challenges their expertise. Spontaneous human combustion, sudden human cremation, if you're honest and open-minded, it in so many ways challenges what is presently known and understood about fire science, about human biology, and about all aspects, many aspects of the scientific community. That's one reason that we spend so much effort, so much time, so much energy tracking down these cases. To us, fires that fit the concept of spontaneous human combustion raise so many fascinating questions, breadth so broad an area that the opportunity to make new discoveries, to learn something that perhaps could even be worthy of a Nobel Prize in medicine or physics, is worthwhile to pursue. Will we figure it out in this lifetime? If we're lucky, the answer is yes. If we don't, we'll turn over our research and maybe someone smarter, more astute than we will figure out an answer. But until then, unfortunately, the pattern of mainstream science, of orthodox thinking, has been to dismiss these cases as hoaxes. They are not. As hearsay, urban legends, they are not. Or as explained away by the Wick effect. That is a hoax in and of itself. We've had physicians, Dr. Lester Adelson comes to mind, who was handed photographs of the cases that we'll be talking to you about tonight, Carl. And he flat out declared these photographs are hoaxes. When asked why the photographs are hoaxes, he said, because bodies don't burn this way. End of case. No mystery for him. He's welcome to take that attitude, but it's a false attitude and very unscientific attitude. The photographs that we have the provenance for the photographs. We know who took them. In many cases, we know the circumstances in which they were taken. And in several cases, we're the only person who has these photographs. If it were not for our dogged determination in tracking down these cases once we get a tip, many of the cases that are mentioned in our book, Ablaze, and that we hopefully will be discussing at some length with you tonight, would have been lost forever to history. They would never have seen the light of day. These cases are so disturbing to so many firefighters that it's easier for them to call them hoaxes, to write them off as the Wick effect, and forget about them, than it is to face the uncomfortable, distressing, and yet very provocative and fascinating facts that cry out for deeper investigation and understanding.
Are you familiar with a Charles Dickens novel by the name of Bleak House that was put out by, Hoblet Knight Brown? It has a depiction in it that kind of resembles spontaneous human combustion. So apparently this is something that's been around for many years.
Yes, we are familiar with Bleak House. In fact, we have an original copy of the Bleak House. And in chapter 33, Charles Dickens created a lot of controversy, may we say, by getting rid of the evil Mr. Crook by means of spontaneous human combustion. As Dickens said, call it whatever you may, it is nonetheless spontaneous human combustion. And we applaud Dickens for saying that. George Lewis, if memory serves, took Dickens severely to task for unduly alarming his readers with something that could never happen and should not have presented as fact, even though Bleak House was clearly fiction. Dickens stood by the case. He said he had investigated the subject before writing about using SHC as a means to rid the city of Mr. Crook. Stood by his contention that SHC was real. We fully support Mr. Dickens in that conclusion of his. As for SHC being around quite some time, Bleak House came out in 1852. The earliest case that we've been able to identify so far in the medical literature dates from the early 1500s and involved a knight named Polonus Vorstius. We're the first one to translate this from the medieval Latin. Uh, it is said that he was observed drinking 2 quaffs of a very strong liquor, undefined beyond that, and suddenly exhaled flame and was reduced almost instantaneously. This comes in a report that was authored by a credible physician in that period of time. But in going back earlier in history, we have cases that fit the classic definition of SHC back into the Greek, Roman, and Scandinavian eras. So we believe this is a phenomenon, even though it's still denied in 2026. It's a phenomenon that has plagued mankind for millennia.
What is the earliest case that there is photo evidence? Would that be John Irving Bentley of 1966, do you think? Or
No. We'll be more than happy to regale you and your audience in a few minutes with the Bentley case. It's one that we discovered and take personal credit for. But to your question, the earliest photographically documented case
yes, sir.
that we know of happened in 1888, February of that year, if memory serves correctly, in a hayloft in Aberdeen, Scotland. The victim is Albert Minster. He was discovered when bystanders saw smoke coming from a hayloft in Aberdeen. They rushed up to put the fire out and discovered that the fire was within Mr. Minster's body. A Dr. Schofield, Dr. Mackenzie Brooks, if memory serves right, was called to the scene. A photograph was taken, and it was written up by the doctor in the British Medical Journal later in 1888 with the photograph. Although obviously at that time it was an etching based on the photograph. What the photograph shows, or what the etching shows, is that Mr. A.M. was reclining in the hayloft of the barn. The body appears to be completely intact. You can recognize the head, the shoulders, the torso, the legs. But the straw in which his body burned was itself intact. When the body was attempted to be removed from the hayloft, it crumbled to powder in the hands of the rescuers. So whatever burned Mr. Minster in a hayloft that did not burn straw was able to completely dehydrate his body. That's a classic trademark of classic spontaneous human combustion fires. The water is evaporated. Water is completely dissociated. And in this case, the body didn't crumble like Mrs. Reeser's did, but was left intact, looking physical until it was touched. If any SHC debunker can replicate that in a laboratory under scientific conditions, please let us know, because we have never heard of a case similar to that.
Yeah, I'd like to know about it myself. Do you have any scientists that privately agree with your theories?
There are a few, yes. When our book was published in 1996, Don Kunkel, fire chief here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, taught arts and science at local community college, and he would have us come in every year for the next 25 years and give a lecture to his students about spontaneous human combustion and other types of pyrophenomena that his students normally would not be exposed to. We bless Don Kunkel for that opportunity, and Don says he would never come out and actually say, I believe that people will spontaneously combust. But as to the problem here comes up with using the word spontaneous with human, which is why we prefer to rename these classic cases sudden human cremation, because it's an accurate description and it gets rid of that spontaneous aspect that so many officials don't like. But Don would say to us, and he said this both to our face and in print, that the cases that we presented to his classes during that quarter century belied what is known and can be explained by mainstream conventional fire thinking today. And he was gracious enough to allow us to present our research, our documentation for these amazing cases to his students. Once in a while, we'll get a fire chief, fire marshal, deputy fire marshals, who will, because they refuse to ignore the evidence that they, as first responders, confront, they have to admit and will tell us that, yes, this can only be explained as sudden human cremation or spontaneous human combustion. But those cases, those gentlemen, are incredibly rare because it takes courage to do so. There's a case in Glasgow, Ireland in 2010. Victim was Michael Flaherty. The medical examiner, McLaughlin, announced that, in his professional opinion, Mr. Flaherty had died by spontaneous human combustion. As soon as we heard about that, we called him up, spoke to him by phone, and he gave us brief information about the case, telling us why he thought this was SHC localized, intensely localized, apparently fearsome destruction to the body by fire that did not consume nearby combustibles. When we had the opportunity to travel to Ireland in 2016, we called Mr. McLaughlin again, trying to arrange an interview with him. He refused, vigorously refused the opportunity. We had also attempted to get the details of the case, the forensics analysis, the police reports, the medical examiner's report from the local constabulary. They refused to cooperate. We believe that McLaughlin now refused to meet with us because he took so much grief, so much heat, if you will, for pronouncing SHC as a plausible official method of death, that he just refused to deal with it any further. Unfortunately, that's something that we've had to face again and again in our research. It's something that shouldn't happen. If his professional opinion was that the evidence before him best can be explained by what history has called spontaneous human combustion, let it stand. We have death certificates where the official cause of death was listed as asphyxiation. This happened in the Dr. Bentley case and in the George Mott case, a retired firefighter in upstate New York in 1986. When there's no trachea, no lungs left at the fire scene, how can you, as a medical examiner, pronounce asphyxiation as cause of death? You don't have anything to autopsy.
Good point.
Best if you're skeptical and don't want to go with SHC, at least put down on the death certificate cause unknown. That's honest, and we can accept that. But when Dr. Bentley burned even more completely than did Mary Reeser, his death happened in northern Pennsylvania, our home state, on December 5, 1966. The night before, Dr. Bentley was apparently in good health, mentally astute, weighed about 180 pounds, used an aluminum walker to locomote through his two-room apartment, his sitting room, his bedroom, and the adjoining bathroom. When a meter reader named Don Gosnell arrived at Dr. Bentley's home in the morning of December 5, 1966, to read the gas meter in the basement, he walked into Dr. Bentley's home, yelled a greeting to the doctor, got no response, went down to the basement, read the gas meter there, and before leaving the basement, he noticed over the earthen floor was a pile of ash about 14 inches in diameter, 5 inches in height. Mr. Gosnell was also a volunteer fireman in Coudersport, Pennsylvania. He walked over to the mound, said, "Last time I was down in the basement, no, this pile of ash wasn't there. Wonder what burned." He looked above the pile of ash on the earthen floor and noticed in the basement ceiling was a hole about 2.5 feet in diameter, and wondered what had burned through the upstairs bathroom and now was a pile of ash in the basement floor. He noticed also there were some cherry red embers around the perimeter of that 2.5 by 3 foot hole. Thinking nothing more of it, he went back upstairs, and before leaving the house to go to the next home to read the meter there, decided he'd check on Dr. Bentley just to make sure that the 92-year-old physician was in good health and okay. Knocked on the door, got no answer. Door was unlocked. Coudersport was a small rural community back in 1966. People did not lock the doors. Don walked into Dr. Bentley's sitting bedroom, did not see the doctor sitting in a chair, which would normally have been the situation. Stepped into the apartment and peered into Dr. Bentley's bathroom and saw the other side of the 2.5 by 3 foot hole, now in the bathroom floor. Adjacent to the floor was half of a leg, that Mr. Gosnell first thought was a mannequin leg. And as he told us, what the hell was Dr. Bentley doing with a mannequin leg on his bathroom floor? He peered down to take a closer look and realized it was not a mannequin leg, it was a human leg. At that point, Mr. Gosnell realized that the ashes that he had just kicked a few minutes earlier down in the basement was what was left of Dr. Bentley's body.
I just posted a picture of that too.
There you go.
It's extraordinary.
It is an extraordinary photograph. And when we got it from the newspaper editor who took it, it changed our life. Because up until that time, we knew we had only had a photograph of Albert Minster from the British Medical Journal and a photograph of Mary Reeser's foot and calcined vertebrae. When we got the photograph of Dr. Bentley, this threw out everything that we had known up to that point that we had seen in medical journals devoted to burn injuries and fire photographs of human fire fatalities. We had never seen a photograph like the Dr. Bentley one, but it had all the hallmarks of classic spontaneous human combustion. An incredibly localized blaze, apparently a fire of ferocity, fearsome heat. And yet, as we continued our investigation, we went to that fire scene. Before the home was remodeled, we stood in the bathroom of Dr. Bentley. We are 6 feet tall. We could stretch our hand up and touch the ceiling directly above the hole through which Dr. Bentley immolated downward. There was not a scorch mark on the ceiling. As we said, Dr. Bentley used an aluminum walker. He was semi-invalidic. Aluminum will melt at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. As that photograph shows, the walker rests directly above the hole through which Dr. Bentley's body burned downward. The aluminum walker is intact.
I was going to ask about that if it was aluminum, but all the legs are there of the walker.
All the legs are there. The basket is there. And 2 of the 4 rubber tips are there. We do not know whether the 2 rubber tips that are missing were missing before the fire or whether they were burned up in the fire, but the other 2 tips are clearly intact. Also, you will note some blackening, carbonization on the bathtub directly above the perimeter of the hole. That bathtub was painted with enamel paint. Though the paint is carbonized black, the paint did not blister. We could chip paint off that bathtub. So here we have a human body that burned more completely than can be accomplished in a crematorium under normal cremation technology. Failed to scorch the ceiling above the point of incineration. Failed to melt aluminum at 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. Failed to blister enamel paint literally inches away from where Dr. Bentley had to be standing before he immolated and burned downward. In addition to that, Don Gosnell told us that when he first entered Dr. Bentley's home, there he encountered a bluish, whitish, gray haze in the hallway and an odd smell that he couldn't characterize, but described as kind of sweet. We talked to to Richard Lindholm, the mortician who helped remove the body from what was left, remove the leg and the head.
Yeah.
Because that was all that was left of Dr. Bentley besides that pile of ash in the basement. He said that he described when he was at the home, there was a sweet smell, as he described it. We subsequently had the opportunity to talk to a lady who lived across the street from Dr. Bentley. And on the morning of December 5, she and her mother questioned each other as to who was barbecuing because they, around 6:30 that morning, thought somebody was barbecuing steak. That's what they smelled.
Uh-huh.
That is so atypical of a normal fatal fire scene involving a dead human body. The stench is accurate. It's extremely difficult to get that unpleasant odor removed from the fire scene. Cases of SHC either have no odor associated with them or a sweet, redolent, perfume-like scent. This is found at the Dr. Bentley fire scene. It's found at several other fires that fit the construct, the concept of sudden human cremation. The local officials, the local firefighters who dealt with the body removal, in fact, as we got around town, other firefighters showed up, and Don Gosnell, the first firefighter on scene, refused to go back into the home. He told his colleagues, "Don't go in there because it's too disturbing. You will not like what you see." They would not they could not believe what he described to them. So one by one, they went in and came out to confirm to Gosnell and subsequently to us in our interviews with him that yes, indeed, this was a real fire scene described as exactly the photograph depicts. Incredible human incineration by what appears to be a fearsomely localized high heat temperature fire that failed to blister paint, failed to melt aluminum, failed to scorch the ceiling directly above the point of combustion. One of our naysayers, Mark Benecke, he's a forensic professional. He teaches in the United States and in Germany. He says, in denying the existence of sudden human cremation, that there is no known case in which internal organs of a burned body are more damaged, more severely burned than are the outer parts. That is his rationale to dismiss the urban legend or the myth of spontaneous human combustion. Well, Dr. Bentley belies Mark Benecke's rationale. Dr. Bentley left behind no heart, no lungs, no esophagus, no liver, no pancreas, no internal organ was at that fire scene, all destroyed, as were the internal organs of Mary Reeser. In Dr. Bentley's case, the coroner attributed death to asphyxiation compounded by burns to 90% of the body. As we said earlier, lacking an asphyxiation, lacking an esophagus, lacking lungs, a coroner, a medical examiner cannot deduce asphyxiation as cause of death. There's no evidence to support that rationale. As far as 90% burning of the body, when we talked to the deputy coroner, John Deck, he said, more like 99% burning of the body, which is closer to the truth. As we said, Dr. Bentley left behind a head that was so badly burned that some of the first responders did not recognize it as a human head. It was found lying on the water pipes below the hole through which his body burned, and half of that leg is gone in its leather slipper. Everything else of Dr. Bentley's 180-pound body was powder, burned more completely than would be accomplished in a crematorium retort. That fits the definition of classic spontaneous human combustion as defined by history, by hundreds of cases that happened before Dr. Bentley in 1966. And as we said, when we got the photograph and we interviewed the witnesses, the first responders, this changed our life because this made no sense in terms of conventional fire science theory and understanding, but it made eminent sense in terms of what history has defined as spontaneous human combustion. And we took a new career path at that point.
In your research, do you feel this is a purely physical situation, or could it involve unknown biological processes within the body, like internal chemical reactions or something to that effect?
We've been criticized for being a pseudoscientist, for making up facts, presenting evidence that is hoaxed as truth. We refute that. That's what some of our critics have done to us and about us. We have demonstrated, we believe effectively on numerous occasions, as well as crematorium operators have demonstrated, that the wick effect does not work for these rare, dramatic, extraordinary cases of human incineration. In our book Ablaze, we explore, we think, in excess of 120 theories to try to offer some guidance based on our research and how we think in our reality construct about how these cases might be explained. We look at biochemistry, we look at bioelectricity, we look at things like prana, ki, energies that Eastern physicians and metaphysicians have dealt with for millennia, but are only beginning to come to cognizance, to recognition in Western medical science. We look for patterns. We found an interesting pattern that we call the cartography of combustion. There are places where these cases involving human incineration as well as other types of pyrophenomena, spontaneous combustion of property, for example, seem to occur along straight alignments. At least in the United Kingdom, they do this. Statistically very significant. We have tracked down cases of SHC that align. And by following these trackways, what we call fire alignments, fire lanes, We have found two cases that happened after we plotted these lines. And if the test of a theory is that it leads you to expected new cases that the theory predicts, then the idea that some of these fires can fall on places that seem to have unusual earth energies, power points underneath our feet, for example, the concept of the cartography of combustion and fire lanes is certainly worth looking at. One case happened, we plotted these alignments in 1975 on a map of the United Kingdom. These lines connect at least three cases, often 4-point alignments, and one amazing alignment that roughly parallels the east coast of the United Kingdom, perhaps a dozen cases of pyrophenomena. In tracking these leads, when we were over in the UK on one of our research expeditions, we went to Lincolnshire, where there's a number of pyrophenomena events had happened. We sat down with the fire brigade commander for Lincolnshire, introduced ourselves, explained why we were there. Might he have cases that we did not know about? His first response was, nope, I've heard about this phenomenon, but then he got really quiet, and we could almost see the wheels cogning in his head.
You could
He
smell the
pulls himself
smoke.
up to his desk, looks at us, and he says, well, you know, a couple of years back, we did have this really strange fire. This old hermit lived alone in a combustible tar paper of a shack. His neighbors said they hadn't seen him for a couple of days, sent out a crew looking for him, went in the house, came back out, he wasn't in the house. Neighbors said he hasn't been outside. He's got to be in there somewhere. Firemen went back inside, and they eventually found him. And what they found between stacks of newspaper was a little bit of ash between the newspapers on the floor, and that was the victim.
Oh, my.
It should have burned the entire structure down, but didn't. Burned so completely that the first responders actually walked through the evidence, i.e. his ashes, not realizing that they were doing so. So by following the fire lanes, we found a new case that we didn't know about that certainly fit the criteria for classic spontaneous human combustion. In 1980, we heard a case that happened in Wales. The victim there was Henry Thomas, burned in much the same fashion that Mary Weiser or Dr. Bentley had burned. We got out our map of fire lanes, and we looked at the lanes, the alignments that went through Wales. And lo and behold, one of those alignments went through a little village called Ibervale. Never heard of it until then. So plotting many cases of pyrophenomena on a map in the UK allowed us to find a new case, find a case that post-dated the alignments by following those alignments, and that more than 80% of those unusual fires can be connected by straight alignments tells us that one theory that merits further investigation is that there are places on the planet that if you're in the right place but at the wrong time, will cause your property or your body to spontaneously combust. We devote a full chapter in our book Ablaze. If that sounds outlandish, and probably it does, get our book and read the chapter about fire lanes, and maybe it will convince you that this is an avenue worth pursuing further.
I'm going to bring something up, and I may be going off the deep end, but have you seen any cases? Yeah. Have you run across any of these occasions or situations where paranormal activity has also played a part, like poltergeist activity and spontaneous human combustion? Or
we do have a file on poltergeist fires. We don't yet have a case where poltergeist fires has incinerated a person, but it's come pretty close. We have a case where a child's garment ignited. The fire was able to be put out. In that case, had that not happened, would she have incinerated? We just don't know. The closest we've come to having a victim involved with paranormal activity is, if memory serves, Peter Vesey, who was said to be dabbling in the occult. The story that we have is that he sent his family out of the house one afternoon, told them not to come back for a few hours. Presumably he was going to engage in some kind of an occult ritual. When the family returned, they found what could possibly be described as classic SHC. We've not been able to get the original source material on that, so we're not willing to put our reputation on the line. We just pass that along. We're certainly not adverse to considering dabbling in the occult or various metaphysical or paranormal other types of Freudian phenomena overlapping, imposing themselves upon this very rare phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion.
Yes, sir. We're a little after the top of the hour. I'm going to go ahead with my second break, and then we'll come back and continue on.
This is Dark Matter News. I'm Joshua Stark. Scientists have uncovered new insights on how cancer cells manage to survive and spread by reprogramming the body's own immune defenses. In this latest study, researchers focused on a key biological process that tumors use to evade detection. Instead of simply growing uncontrollably, many cancers actively send out signals that confuse or suppress nearby immune cells, effectively turning off the body's natural alarm system. The team found that certain immune cells in the tumor environment can be re-educated by cancer to support, rather than attack, tumor growth. This creates a protective microenvironment where cancer can expand more easily and resist treatment. This is Dark Matter News.
The Bible describes men's thoughts in the last days as deeply corrupted, selfish, and rebellious against God, marked by perilous times. In reverse speech, the fulfillment of prophecy, David John Oates goes beyond psychology and linguistics to ask a deeper question. Did Scripture anticipate a time when hidden words would be revealed? Drawing from the Bible, the Gospels, Revelation, and ancient spiritual traditions, this book examines recurring themes long overlooked. The voice of the heart, words that testify against us, secrets proclaimed from the housetops, sealed books opened at the appointed time, and the two-edged sword that proceeds from the mouth. David Oates argues that these are not merely poetic metaphors, but descriptions of a revelatory process now made visible through modern technology. Reverse speech, fulfillment of prophecy, now available at Amazon.com. Get your copy today.
Maryland is on the verge of making history in a very unusual way by officially designating the extinct megalodon as its state shark. Lawmakers in the state have passed a bill that would give the prehistoric giant shark formal recognition, sending the measure to Governor Wes Moore's desk for final approval. If signed into law, Maryland would become the first U.S. state ever to have an official state shark. The choice of megalodon isn't random. Fossilized teeth from the massive shark, one of the largest predators to ever live, are commonly found along Maryland's Chesapeake Bay region, especially near Calvert Cliffs. These discoveries have made the ancient species a natural symbol of the state's deep prehistoric marine history. Megalodon itself lived millions of years ago and is believed to have reached lengths of up to 80 feet or more, dominating ancient oceans before going extinct roughly 3.5 million years ago. Supporters of the bill say the designation is meant to highlight Maryland's rich fossil record and spark interest in both science and ocean history. It also joins a growing list of quirky official state symbols alongside birds, reptiles, and even state dinosaurs in other parts of the country. While symbolic, the move has generated attention for blending paleontology with pop culture, turning one of Earth's most fearsome ancient predators into a modern-day state icon. This is one bill I'd love to see approved. Catch up with Dark Matter News on Facebook and darkmatternews.com. From Memphis, Tennessee, I'm Joshua Stark.
Hi, this is Jessica with C. Crane. Tired of spotty radio reception and static? C. Crane CC Wi-Fi 3 Internet Radio offers a crystal clear solution with audio guaranteed to outperform any smartphone speaker. With an internet connection, tune in to over 30,000 radio stations from around the world, all conveniently accessible without needing any apps, providing personal information, or additional monthly subscriptions. Enjoy complete privacy with no microphone or eavesdropping. The CC Wi-Fi 3 boasts a user-friendly interface with a full-sized remote for easy control. It also doubles as a Bluetooth speaker for your favorite music and podcasts. Ready to upgrade your listening experience? You can get the CC Wi-Fi 3 by calling C. Crane at 800-522-8863 or by visiting us online at ccrane.com. Once again, that's CCRANE.com.
I said if I can't feel it, then how could it be? No magic.
Welcome back to Midnight Frequency Radio and our guest, Larry Arnold. Larry, on all of these cases that you've discussed, has there been any similarity between age, health, lifestyle of the victims?
Similarities are that all the victims are human. We're not being facetious because beyond that, there's not much commonality that we can find. It was once claimed in the 17 and early 1800s when this was a hotly debated subject within the mainstream medical community in France and in Germany, that all victims of SHC were female, elderly, sedentary, alcoholic, drunken sots. Not true. Statistically, in our database of about 500 examples that fit the concept of SHC, 50% are female, 47% are male, and history just doesn't tell us the 3% remaining as to gender. So by gender, about 50-50, male or female, you could become a victim, albeit rarely and not likely, but potentially a victim of SHC. The age ranges, we have children ages 4 and 5 to whom this has happened, all the way up to age 90. Not surprisingly, at least in our view, the elderly are more prone to have this fate happen to them. Body tends to break down with age, so that does not surprise us. Some are drunks, yes. Some are teetotalers. Some are smokers. Some are not smokers. If there is a commonality that ties most of these victims together, it's one that we've not been able to identify. History just doesn't provide. This is one of the problems with the researching of this topic. The fire files, which should be a wealth of information to peruse and dig into, are sadly lacking in many cases. We have the file on Mary Reeser. For people who say that we're a mystery monger, as Joe Nickel has said to us, this is our file on Mary Reeser. This is one case, and this isn't the entire file.
That's a pretty hefty file.
We're creating a lot of fake documentation, you know? We do our best to track down all the information that we can find from the first responders, from the autopsy reports, if they're available, from the police files, from photographic evidence, whatever, to verify that what we are writing about, what we are discussing, what we are researching, really is based on the best available documentation that we as a researcher can provide. It's not been an easy task. We alluded in the first hour to a couple cases that we'd like to delve into a bit deeper. One is George Mott. George Mott was a retired firefighter in upstate New York back in 1986. Late March of that year, his son Kendall had not heard from his dad in a day and a half or two. Was concerned, went out to his dad's home, and as soon as he opened the front door, he realized that something was amiss and refused to go farther. Called a neighbor who went in and discovered that Mr. Mott had burned to death in his bedroom in the rear of the home. It was a domicile about 20 by 40 feet in square footage, and it proved to be an incredibly complex and difficult to describe, difficult to understand fire scene. What was notable was what happened in Mr. Mott's bedroom. We made 3 trips from down south central Pennsylvania to upstate New York to meet with the first responders, to meet with the fire officials, the county emergency preparedness director, Bob Purdy, state fire investigators, and take what we believe is the most comprehensively documented photographic evidence at a classic scene of spontaneous human combustion. Why is Mr. Mott's fire death classic SHC? He burned through his bed, through the floorboards below the bed, leaving his ashes in a crawl space below, quite reminiscent of Dr. Bentley. On the bed was Mr. Mott's head, said by Tony Moret, the local fire investigator, who knew his colleague as a friend as well as a firefighter, that Mr. Mott's head had shrunken in size to about that of a grapefruit. Not supposed to happen in any human fire fatality. At the other end of the bed was half of Mr. Mott's right leg. Everything else was ashed, burned through the bed, through the mattress. When we are showing that one of those photographs to those students that we taught for Don Kunkel's fire science level, college level fire science class, I think in 25 years we had one student who was able to identify that leg in the photograph. It's not easy to see. This is how badly Mr. Mott burned up. As we said, we went to that fire scene 3 times. On our second trip, we gained access to the house with permission of the family and the fire investigator. We stood where Mr. Mott's bed was. We could look down on the hole through which his body burned. We could touch the ceiling directly above Mr. Mott's bed. And like the ceiling in Dr. Bentley's bathroom, there was not a scorch mark on the ceiling above Mr. Mott's bed. No odor of burned flesh. Once again, an incredibly localized, apparently fearsomely hot fire, and yet no evidence of 2,000-degree temperatures elsewhere in Mr. Mott's home. It was a tinderbox of an environment. Again, the entire structure should have burned to the ground. It did not. In the death certificate of Mr. Mott, death is attributed to asphyxiation. Once again, no esophagus, no lungs to autopsy. Ironically, Mr. Mott's leg and ashes were taken to the Burlington crematorium to be cremated. We called the crematorium up, said, have you ever gotten a body like this before, this badly burned? They said, no. So there wasn't much to cremate, was there? They with a smile, they said no, but they did the job anyway. So Mr. Mott got doubly cremated, once by himself and once by a retort. Ashes were stewing at sea. A stunningly remarkable case. But once again, had we not been tipped off to this by a colleague in upstate New York and doggedly pursued it, this case would be lost to history. As a factual fire investigator, one would never know about it. The other case we'd like to share with you is another one that we personally investigated. It took us more than serendipity to track this one down. We had the opportunity to attend as a non-firefighter an advanced arson course offered by the Pennsylvania Fire Academy. This is a rare and perhaps unique privilege that was afforded to us. At the end of that class, where we learned things like how we could go to a corner drugstore and buy chemicals that we could use to create incendiary devices, the instructor, Buzz Trebold, said, I just got an envelope with some photographs that some people might say is spontaneous human combustion. He said it was a lady who burned up in a chair, didn't they, in a very localized fire. I went thinking, oh, he just got a photograph of Mary Reeser. Ta-da! He's passing the photographs around. We're chatting with a fellow student about the Reeser case, and when the photograph lands in our hand, we look at it and immediately realize this is a chair fire, yes, but the chair is reasonably intact, and in front of the chair are two lower human legs. This is not the Reeser case. This is a case we know nothing about. You can probably imagine quite easily how eager we were to meet with the instructor after the rest of the class had dismissed. Who, where, when, how, what? How do we learn more about this case? He didn't know other than it happened somewhere in southeastern Pennsylvania. Wow. Most populous part of Pennsylvania. Millions of people lived down there. We had no name, no date, no fire company. We just had this astonishing photograph to try to track down. Through serendipity and a bit of luck, 9 months later, we had a name, we had a place, we had a fire company. We pursued it, and after a couple anxious weeks, we got a letter from Bob Meslin, who was the fire marshal for Upper Darby Township outside of Philadelphia in 1964. In 1964, November 12th, if memory serves, Mrs. Conway's family had gone to Sunday morning church, leaving behind Mrs. Conway in a second floor sitting room and two grandchildren downstairs watching television. Long story short, bypasser notices smoke coming from the second floor window. The granddaughter had just been sent to retrieve a pack of cigarettes for Helen Conway for her grandmother. Fire department arrives, rush upstairs, hose, extinguishing equipment to a fire scene that they don't have to extinguish. When the smoke is cleared, they find a chair, largely intact, two human legs propped up against the front of the chair. The rest of Mrs. Conway's body is severely, severely burned. But next to her chair is a telephone just partially melted. On her thigh, she was partially invalidic, was a brass bell that she used to summon assistance, probably used to have her granddaughter Stephanie bring up that pack of cigarettes. The wood handle on that brass bell would melt at 507 degrees. It did not burn. What we learned from Bob Meslin, the fire marshal, is in his view, from the time that Mrs. Conway was known to be alive until the fire department arrived to a fire scene that they did not have to extinguish, was 20 minutes. This is astonishing. This is almost unbelievable. And in terms of normal fire science behavior, it would be unbelievable. One of the problems with researching spontaneous human combustion is the time factor. People say, well, Mrs. Reeser was seen alive at 9 p.m., and the Western Union Telegram arrived the next morning at 8 p.m. She had 11 or 12 hours that she could have slowly burned herself via the wick effect. But in the Conway case, we have the time window, we believe, locked down, but not locked down to 20 minutes, because the 20 minutes that Bob Meslin first wrote to us about involved the time that it took him to arrive at the fire scene, be sent home by the fire chief, Paul Haggerty, to get his camera, return to the fire scene, have the smoke ejected, and take a dozen photographs. When we subtract all that time from 20 minutes, we're down to 6 minutes maximum from the time that Mrs. Conway was known to be alive until the fire department arrived. There is no way in any fire science textbook that we have seen that can explain the amount of destruction to Mrs. Conway in 6 minutes. Just nothing conventional can explain this. However, because people don't like to deal with SHC, we have people like John Tribell, who says this, and we're going to quote, "As scientists, it is clear to us that if a whole torso burns away with minimal damage to its surroundings, i.e. the Conway case, this must occur at a relatively slow rate over a number of hours. The lack of observed timings in most cases, however, is a boon to the peddlers of SHC propaganda who can compound the mystery with exaggerated claims of reduced timescales. And now he continues. Thus, as a case from the USA, the remains of Helen Conway were found on November 8, 1964 in Upper Darby Township, Pennsylvania. The SHC storyline is that her granddaughter spoke to her on the telephone at 8:42. That's wrong. There's no telephone call there. But firemen found her completely consumed at 8:48. There is something clearly wrong in either the witness accounts or the reporting of this case. So, John DeHaan, another fire expert in Pennsylvania and in the United States, came up with the same thing. Something has to be wrong with the chronology because it couldn't happen in 20 minutes. It couldn't happen in 6 minutes. What? The family left the grandmother alone burning for hours while they went to church? Highly unlikely. In fact, we would say quite impossible. This continual effort to change the facts to something that the experts are willing to find comfortable to avoid their own xenophobia is something that really ticks us the heck off. We've done the research. We spoke to the fire chief, the fire marshal, and the deputy fire marshal involved in the Conway case. And they all, to a person, have no reason to refute the timeline that we have given to you. They found no evidence of foul play. No accelerants were involved. This is a case, as they said, looked like the victim had been hit by the afterburner of a jet engine. And it happened in 6 minutes, or less, but at least no more than 6 minutes. If we may, we're going to conclude our coverage of the Conway case with this quote from Harry Lott, who is the assistant fire marshal in the Conway case. Quoting, "The thing which is disturbing to me about the whole thing was that the amount of damage done to her body in the time frame that was allowable. It would seem to me you'd probably have to have a temperature of between 1,500 and 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit in order to do that much damage to that body. And that just wasn't the case. There was nothing there to substantiate that temperature. The lady was still sitting. Her remains were still sitting upright in the chair. And that's amazing to me that all those things like that could happen. It couldn't burn like that, but it did." End quote.
Do you find it as interesting as I do that a lot of scientists will go around the world across the street to come to a conclusion? It just amazes me. It just
Yes, it amazes us too, and it's become incredibly frustrating to us. We have fire professionals who have lied to our face, and they have lied to the media about the cases that we're sharing with you, the cases that we have devoted basically our lifetime to document. It's not just the professional firefighters. I'll give you an example of that. When we were down in Philadelphia, just after we sat down with Bob Meslin at his kitchen table, went over the time frame for the Conway case. We drove a couple miles east to downtown Philadelphia because we had several cases in the city of brotherly love that we wanted to track down. Met with a senior fire investigator on duty that day. Introduced ourselves, said, "Here are the names, the dates, the locations in your city. We'd like to see the fire files for research purposes." "Well, Mr. Arnold, I can't show you those files because," I said, "well, okay, maybe you move the files. This is brand new headquarters. We'll go to wherever the files are located." "No, you don't understand, Mr. Arnold. The reason I can't show you these files is because what you're asking about doesn't happen. So we can't have files about them."
Jesus.
On his desk, we put the photograph of Mary Reeser. We put the photograph of Dr. Bentley with his aluminum walker. And we put the photograph of Helen Conway with her 2 legs propped up in front of her incinerated body on his desk and said, "Here are the details, real succinctly. Now, you're the expert. You help us understand from your experience as a professional firefighter, what would you do if you were called to a fire scene and saw what these photographs depicted?" Long silence. We put the question to him a second time. His answer we shall never forget. Direct quote, "I'd go out, get drunk, and forget about it.
Oh, good God. Yeah.
At which point we were told to pack up our photos, pack up our paper, and he escorted us, not just out of his office, not just to the elevator, but to the ground floor, to the sidewalk. This is how scared, how intimidating, how horrifically frightening this subject is to professional firefighters. So imagine what it is like to the general public. We found that people are kind of curious. It intrigues to a point, but they don't want to know too much about it. It's just the nature of the beast, so to speak.
Yeah.
We've got that attitude repeatedly from professional firefighters. Unfortunately, we get the same attitude from professional skeptics. And boy, are we being kind when we put skeptic in air quotes here. I'm sure you, Carl, and most, if not all of your listeners will recognize the name Joe Nickel.
Yes.
Professional skeptic who made his transition now just about a little over a year ago. Anyway, he's been our nemesis for, 25, 30 years. We have a long history going back together. We've interviewed Joe. He's spoken to us. He's signed his books to us with derogatory inscriptions. We've shared television programs together. In his books and in his writing, he has said regarding the Bentley case in particular that he knows exactly how Dr. Bentley died. And it's by ashes from his pipe for sure, with an exclamation point. Okay, fine. That means Joe Nickel, without equivocation, knows exactly how Dr. Bentley died. But the only way he can know that is if either he was there in person or he found an eyewitness. Well, we know Joe wasn't there in person. So who is the eyewitness? We wrote to Joe and we asked him very politely if he would be so kind as to tell us who the eyewitness is, how he managed to locate the eyewitness, because we could not find one. The closest we got was Don Gosnell, who discovered the ashes. And we would certainly give Mr. Nickel credit for being the incredible detective sleuth that he purports to be. Joe wrote back to us in written letter. It begins, I didn't, of course, have the eyewitness you sarcastically imagine in your familiar caricature manner. It should be apparent to anyone dazzled by the fantasy of SHC that I made deductions and inference based on inference from the research that we did, not that he did. So Joe has no eyewitness. He guessed, but he presented his speculation as fact, and that is dishonest. That is dishonest scientifically. That is dishonest skeptically. It's not the first time that Joe has done this to our research. And rather than deal with the evidence that we present to him and try to make scientific sense of it, it was easier for Joe to ridicule it, to misrepresent it, and to mischaracterize it. When he transitioned, we knew that Skeptical Inquirer would publish laudatory obits about Mr. Nickel, one of their own. We submitted a 1,300-word counter obit detailing the many, many times that Mr. Nickel portrayed himself as not a skeptic, but by definition a debunker, or misrepresented himself to the public. Skeptical Inquirer's editor refused to print that because it would be inappropriate for them, he said, to malign one of their own.
Well, Mr. Nickel's a boil in a lot of people's side. It's
Now, he is a clever wordsmith. He's good on-air persona. He can make himself sound really convincing, but do so with integrity, do so with honesty, do so with facts at hand. And those are three things that, in our personal experience over many years with Joe Nickel, he lacked all three. He lacked integrity, he lacked honesty, and it was easier, as it is for someone well-known in politics these days, to malign and cast aspersions and name call.
Exactly.
Something you find uncomfortable.
I'm with you. Are there any other cases that you would like to cover this evening?
Oh yeah, this is one we rarely talk about, but this intrigues the heck out of us. I think this will be a special one for you, Carl, and for your listeners. And thank you, by the way, for this opportunity. We really value it. This is a fairly old case, but it is so intriguing that we've pulled it out from file just for you. Here we go. November 10, 1731, a fierce but localized fire ravaged a 68-year-old female in Vitry. This is a remote village in eastern France. The woman who lived alone fell and struck her head on a hearth which had, it is said, but a little fire in it. Now, we're quoting a physician who was at the scene. News of her death spread like wildfire the next day when neighbors discovered that, and here we quote, her body, though reduced to ashes, appeared at first to be quite whole, reminiscent of Albert Minster in 1888 in Aberdeen, Scotland. We continue with quoting, one surprisingly noticed the folds of her dress, upon which her right arm and fingers were like firebrands. On touching them, one found no more than ashes. All the bones, even the largest, were consumed. End quote. What is significant about that, aside from having the hallmarks of classic SHC, is that her bones, her fingers, were found on folds of her clothing. That is, her flesh burned to ashes in a fire that failed to consume her garments.
How does that happen?
Please, we want, if Joe Nickel were still alive, or fire expert John DeHaan still alive, or Mark Benecki or Elaine Pope, or any other SHC denier, to duplicate that situation under laboratory conditions. We've got a stack of C notes that says you're going to fail.
I'm in with
Have
you.
at us. Have at us.
Have there any been cases that have been quietly closed regarding SHC?
Oh, wow.
That's a pile of them, isn't it?
I'm not sure we've been asked that question before. If they were successfully closed, we would not learn about them. It almost happened with the Mott case. It almost happened with the Conway case. Lord knows how many cases has happened to that we haven't heard about yet. There was a case in Hoquiam, Washington. The name at the moment escapes us. I think it was Sewell. Barbara Sewell, don't hold us to that. Supposedly, her corpse combusted in the funeral home where she was to be interred or given last rites. We wrote to the funeral home and got nowhere. We were in Hoquiam, tried to track it down in person, got nowhere. There's one other instance that does come to mind. We were contacted by an attorney in a lawsuit that involved a hospital and a burn victim. And the defense was going to argue that it was not malpractice, but a case of SHC, and they wanted us to be an expert witness. Fabulous. We would do that. We would testify to the best of our ability and knowledge once we know more about the case. And that's where the opportunity died quickly. Whether it was SHC, we don't know. Whether it was medical malpractice, a cauterizer that ignited the victim's robe on the operating table, we don't know.
During your research, have you ever been actively discouraged from pursuing certain leads? Say, proverbially Men in Black type characters approaching you and tell you, don't go there.
Not that we know. When we've been thwarted in our investigations, it's been to our face and very obvious, like the fire inspector in Philadelphia, the fire instructors at the National Fire Academy in Emmitsburg. They're up front. They don't want to deal with us, and they tell us so.
Yeah.
We're unaware of any clandestine subterfuge that's working behind the scenes to thwart us.
Has this research changed your view on the human body?
Oh, wow. Has it changed our view on the human body? Probably not. As long as we can consciously recall, we've been pretty open to all kinds of weird things that the human body can do to itself. It certainly has opened us to more possibilities that the human body can do to itself or that can happen to the human body from external circumstances that are not yet recognized by orthodoxy, by medicine, by mainstream science. Being interested in a wide range of Fortean phenomena, but having specialized in pyrophenomena, we're just amazed and intrigued by what nature can do to a human being.
Do you believe this could happen to anyone?
If one is very spiritually evolved, it might happen by choice. Conversely, a very evolved spiritual person would likely, in our view, have the wherewithal to prevent it from happening if the circumstances external were about to occur. As we've alluded to earlier, this is an extraordinarily rare phenomenon. You probably have the probability of being struck multiple times by lightning, as was Roy Sullivan, than becoming a singular case of sudden human cremation. But being rare doesn't mean impossible.
And this will be my last question. Have you ever experienced anything personally that makes you think this is more real?
Wow. Oh boy. We're going to answer that multiple ways. One, yes, we have experienced spontaneous human combustion. And we say that because we have been severely sunburned. A few centuries ago, being sunburned would fit the definition and the concept of spontaneous human combustion, albeit not as extreme as Mary Reeser or George Mott or Dr. Bentley or Helen Conway. But spontaneous burning of flesh by means unknown. Now, today we understand, science understands that sunburn is caused by ultraviolet radiation. It's still SHC, but it's an explained and accepted form of SHC. We'll also answer your question by saying that we have been noted to produce extremely high body temperature while asleep. That did not lead to classic SHC. Could it in someone else or in ourselves? It's plausible in our viewpoint, in our reality construct, that is plausible. More than a few women have talked to us about experiencing menopausal hot heat flashes and wondered if they could SHC as a result.
Why not?
Why not? Who knows? Well, we can't say that that's how these cases can be best explained, but we're not adverse to the possibility that this is one more means to explore. And something as bizarre and denied as is sudden human cremation, SHC, we have to be, as a researcher, we believe, open to all possibilities, all probabilities, and narrow down or eliminate the ones for which we can categorically say, nope, this one doesn't work. Until then, though, this is a field that's wide open for speculation, for exploration, and frankly, for honest discovery, because there are mysteries afoot here that need to be resolved, need to be addressed, and need to be explained.
Absolutely.
Because until that happens, people are going to continue to die. This is rare, as we've said repeatedly, but there's going to be another case. The last one we investigated that we would stake our reputation on that fit the classic concept was in 2013 in eastern Oklahoma, the victim Danny Van Zant, classic case. The photographs are astounding. Again, had we not been tipped off to the case and doggedly pursued it, probably lost to history, because the family, much as we tried, would not cooperate with us. Fire department, fire departments, the fire marshal for Sequoia County were very cooperative, however, and encouraged us to help them to understand how best that fire death could be explained. As Rick Russell, the fire chief, the first responder, told us, this fire in Danny Van Zant began and ended at the body. Another very localized fire that burned through the whole. In this case, left behind his heart, but no other internal organ, once again belying Mark Benecki's means to dismiss SHC as an urban myth or a hoax.
Well, if you run across any newer stuff and you would like to come on the show to discuss it, give me a call and I will have you on.
Be delighted to do that.
And your comments earlier about sunburn, my dad did 2 tours of duty on Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. And we would go spend the entire weekend at the beach. And I've had burns so bad that I had to have vinegar baths, go to the emergency room and get Benadryl shots. So that's a very serious issue in itself. So nowadays, I don't step outdoors on a sunny day without sunscreen, and I recommend others do the same.
Very good. Yep. There you go. Actually, that you just brought to mind real quickly. There is a medical condition called Stevens-Johnson syndrome, SJS, that involves inexplicable burns to the body, usually of a chemical nature. So again, there's one little niche in mainstream medical science that will recognize one type of spontaneous human combustion. They just call it Stevens-Johnson syndrome. But when you get into the more classic cases like we've been sharing with you, where the body is wholly incinerated, Stevens-Johnson doesn't work. So we'll back to that mystery again.
Do you have a website that our listeners can go to and view some of your content?
We do. It's Parascience, PARAscience.com. Not the best website. We need to revamp it, but it'll get you started. Also gives the viewer email to us. We're certainly open and eager to hear from anybody who's watching the program tonight. Throw your questions at us. Give us your ideas. And best of all, if you got a lead on a possible new case, you're going to get one. That's what we're here for, to track down these mysteries, look for patterns, look for solutions, and maybe we'll get a Nobel Prize in medicine someday.
And where can they go to locate your book, Ablaze?
The best way to do that is go to Amazon, type in Ablaze, Larry Arnold, and that'll link you to the book. Now, word of note, for reasons we have been unable to understand, aside from what causes spontaneous human combustion, Amazon continually puts up that Ablaze is some romance novel about 2 people. It's not a romance novel. We've tried to correct that repeatedly and fail every time. But if you go down to the reviews, or a review of the book, you see that this is a book about real events, researched, and unless you've read the book already, we will guarantee that you are going to learn at least one thing, probably a whole lot of new things that you did not know heretofore. This book is the product of years of archival research, traveling around the world, speaking and interviewing first responders, and collecting photographs for these amazing cases that include not just fire fatalities, but survivors of partial spontaneous human combustion.
It sounds like Amazon needs to update their AI on automatically picking categories for their books, is what that sounds like. Mr. Arnold, it has been a pleasure to have you on the show tonight, and I look forward to having you on in the future if you want to cross any new cases or release any new materials.
We will certainly keep you in mind, Carl. It's been our pleasure and honor. You've done a wonderful job covering a subject that is very difficult. We appreciate the opportunity. Blessings to you and all your listeners and viewers.
Thank you, sir, and I hope you have a good evening. Forget what time zone you're in, but it's probably very late there.
It's close to midnight,
Okay.
Eastern.
Well, it's time for me to let you go to bed then.
Take care.
You have a good night.
Be well.